Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Why do I keep on making these mistakes? This is the third, maybe fourth time that I've tried to do this, and I made a bunch of grammatical mistakes at the beginning. Well, be that as it may, who cares? I am here now. Hopefully, I will not make any major grammatical mistakes anymore. But if I do, I will simply excuse myself and start all over again. I don't want to burden any of you, but um, I can't keep on doing this over and over again. I have no more time. Just kidding. I have all the time in the world. I'm a retired guy. Um, I wanted to talk today about the difference, as I see them, between unmitigated or maybe unfocused anger and righteous indignation. They are two very different things, and they are things that I think that a lot of people, including me, I'm not excluding myself at all, do not necessarily consider all the time. There are sometimes, honestly, looking at the world, when I just have a lot of unfocused anger. And I assume I'm not alone. Anybody who is aware of the world situation right now, who follows the news in whatever format you prefer, whether reading the news on paper. Who reads the news on paper anymore? I guess some people do. Reading it on the web or listening to it in podcasts or going to various news sites and listening to it there. It is hard not to be really, really angry. Just angry. Not angry for any particular reason, like focused anger, which I would call righteous indignation, but just unfocused anger. It's like a kind of anger that you don't really know what to do with. When I see all the problems going on right now in the third world, and I will try not to be specific, as I promised myself, I will attempt to avoid being partisan, because when I get partisan, I experience a lot of unfocused anger, which I'm trying to avoid as an autistic guy. But regardless, I look around at the world. I'll just speak for myself. And I see so many horrible things occurring in the world. And there are certainly reasons to be angry at them. Not only that, but I look around at people that I know, including some people that I've known for a really long time, like 40, 50 years. Can't really go beyond 50 years. That's long enough. And I see the kinds of problems that they also are going through. I look at my family, and without getting specific, I see tremendous problems there as well. Problems basically, I guess, to sum it up without being precise, problems with relations, problems with relationality. And relationality governs everything that we do in our lives. If our relations with others are not good, then our lives are not going to be good, because it is impossible to have a good life without having a connection or connections with other people. And I feel that myself sometimes. I especially feel that today. And I won't say why, because if I say why, I feel I may come too close to revealing who the person or persons are that I am referring to, and I don't want to do that. But I see their problems. I see my problems. And I see that for some reason, and I think it is because of all of the problems of late capitalism, to be honest, and that we are having all of these difficulties. Now, I realize some people use the term late capitalism as an excuse for careful analysis. You say late capitalism, and it makes you sound like you know what you were talking about, even if you don't. I'm aware of that. I try not to do that. Meaning, when I say late capitalism, I have something in my head that I mean by late capitalism. This is what I mean. That capitalism in the first world has gotten so gosh darn awful that it is difficult getting through one's day. There is so much alienation. Marx and Engels wrote about alienation. They are the ones who principally brought the concept of alienation into the social sciences. My own field of sociology, prior to the late 1960s, was a relatively conservative field. By the time I had come into it in the 70s, that conservatism had gone away. I missed the massive sociology wars of the late 1960s and arguably early 1970s. I didn't become a college student until 1974 and a graduate student until 1976. And then I finished my Ph.D. a few years after that. And so I missed that. In some ways, I feel bad about having missed that. I would have liked to have seen the turmoil. What it basically was, it's not very complicated. You had the old-time sociologists. Many of them were rural sociologists. Not all, but many. And I met some of them. I knew some of them. But by that time, they knew they had already lost. And they were very conservative. Not conservative necessarily in the way people use conservatism today, like Trumpism. Not necessarily that kind of conservatism. But conservative in the sense that they liked society the way it was. They really did not want to see much in the way of radical change. Radical change really was anathema to them, repulsive to them. They liked society the way it was. The dominant sociological theory during that period was the structural functionalism of Talcott Parsons. I used to teach Introduction to Sociology, which at one time was dominated by the ideas of Talcott Parsons. I almost never mentioned Talcott Parsons in my classes. Why? Because he had become irrelevant. Nobody cared about him anymore. He dominated my field for decades. Decades. But now all of a sudden, Parsons was, I was going to say discredited, but that might be an exaggeration. He was seen as being a kind of blowhard, which may be worse. In other words, he had these big macro sociological theories, meaning big sociological theories about everything. And a lot of it was, people realized, purely Talcott Parsons' imagination. At the same time, my forebears, maybe half a generation before me, but we were all baby boomers, were becoming radical sociologists. That was the trend in sociology in the late 1960s, early 1970s, the radical sociology movement, which no longer exists by that name. Does it exist? Yes. But the term radical sociology has become antiquated. Nobody, or almost nobody, talks about radical sociology anymore. I mean, there is a radical sociology, but the term itself has basically fallen into disuse. The radical sociologists were people that were involved largely in the civil rights movement, like I was, but I was too young. I was involved in the civil rights movement as a young teenager. So I was not yet in college. I did not see the massive changes that were taking place at American colleges and universities. I wasn't even aware they were going on, to be honest. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I planned to do, and I didn't end up exactly doing that, namely becoming a theater major and becoming a professional actor. But I ended up becoming something even better, a sociologist. What could be better than that? Now, I'm half joking, but not entirely joking. I love sociology. I would say the best decision of my life was to get my MA and Ph.D. in sociology. In case you didn't know this, the majority of Ph.D. students never complete their PhDs. I can't imagine how that must feel. You've gone through the entire process. You become what is known as ABD, which stands for all but dissertation, meaning you've taken your preliminary examinations, but you have not started or completed your PhD, which means you haven't finished your dissertation. You haven't defended it, and so you don't have a PhD. I have known a lot of people who were ABD. One seemed kind of upset at it, but not that upset. And one may have been upset at one time, but seemed to have gotten over it. Regardless, the sociology wars of the late 60s, early 1970s involved all of us, in a sense, even though the people I just mentioned and myself were too young to be a part of them directly, because we ended up in a field which had just been literally transformed from a conservative field to a Marxist field. sociology is now the most left-wing field in academia. Does that make it perfect? No. There are no perfect fields in academia. Academia is what it is. You make of it what you will. It is up to you how you pursue your own academic field. Not up to anybody else. Once you finish your Ph.D., your research is in your own hands. So, here I was, a new Ph.D. My first position was a temporary position at a place called Caldwell University in Caldwell, New Jersey. It is a Dominican Roman Catholic university. When I went there, it was actually called Caldwell College, but same place. And for the first time, I was on my own. I had to make my own field. I had to decide my own destiny. That was very frightening. I was filled with a lot of fear. Where do I go? What do I do? What do I specialize in? I mean, I had some idea, but it wasn't definitive. I mean, I knew I was a Marxist sociologist, but I was also a bit of a disciple of Pitorimé Sorokin, which I probably mispronounced. I never got his first name pronounced correctly. Maybe Pitorim A. Sorokin. He was a right-winger, like Parsons. There were aspects of Sorokin's work that I liked. And so I simply ignored the rest, which I hated. But eventually that became too much for me, and I dumped Sorokin. And so I was left with Marx. And so what kind of Marxist sociologist would I be? That went through many, many turns, many, many stages. But they were all accompanied by a considerable amount of fear and uncertainty, because I really was not sure what I wanted to do with my career. Now, in a sense, my career is over, at least my career for pay. I mean, it's not over. I see my podcasts as a part of the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism, as a continuation of my academic work. In fact, my style of delivering podcasts is almost identical to the style I used in giving lectures. So if you hate my podcasts, you would have despised my lectures. If you love my podcasts, you might have liked my lectures as well, maybe. But very, very similar style. I learned how to communicate. Any professor has to learn that. For me as an autistic, that was especially challenging, because autistics have a really difficult time getting their ideas across. I would often try, but no matter how many times I tried, I would fail. And I knew it. And I knew it more than anybody else. I would say the wrong things. I would have to apologize, but I got through. I got through. I finished a career as a sociology professor, as a tenured full professor of sociology. Not only that, but for those of you that have watched my earlier podcasts, To my surprise, I was nouveau riche, a multimillionaire. I had no idea that I was nouveau riche until I got down here from Texas. I mean, most of my career was in Kansas, in the Kansas City metropolitan area, on the Kansas side, in the Kansas suburbs. No, not in Kansas City, Kansas. I lived in a town called Olathe, Kansas, which is the county seat of Johnson County. But it's right near the two Kansas cities. Actually, it's closer to Kansas City, Missouri than Kansas City, Kansas, which is further up to the north, even though it's on the Kansas side. So, again, I gradually worked out my career, and now I am retired. Now my career, in the sense of working for money, is over. I have the money. I have too much money. But I have the money. Is the money here? No, the money is paid to me like a salary by my fiduciary, by the college. So I have no money here, literally no money. Maybe I have like $10 or $20. Somebody walks in here, they would think I was broke, because this place, you can't see it because of my background, but this place looks like an absolute and total wreck. My father used to always tell me, because I was a slob since I was a child, that my room looked like Langley Collier's mansion. And till this day, I have really no idea who Langley Collier was, although I assume he had some connection with the family that published Collier's Encyclopedia. I don't know that, though. But apparently he was a wealthy man for his time. But when he died, they literally found him buried in junk. That's me. I expect when I die, people will find me buried in junk as well, because I am a slob. I am the opposite of my mother, who was a passionate neat freak, and my father, who was also a passionate neat freak. But I was not, never have been, and I doubt I ever will be. People would come by my place and they'd say, "Look at how nice your place looks. You must feel really happy." And I would say, "No, I don't. I don't feel anything," which was true. Okay, to the topic of directed fear or righteous indignation and undirected fear. Really, the topic of this podcast, from which I have deviated a fair amount. Throughout my career, I had a lot of undirected fear. I guess you could call that anxiety. Autistics generally have a lot of anxiety. It's a neurological condition. It's a developmental disorder. It's a part of who I am. I'm used to it. I have less anxiety now than I did when I was a kid, but I still have a lot of anxiety. Anxiety, I have learned, is not helpful. It has not been helpful in my career. And I have certainly had my share of anxiety in my career. All professors do. Being a professor is very, very hard. Despite the common refrain, usually by people on the right wing, not always, but usually in my experience, about people living in the ivory tower. disconnected from the world. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you are a professor and you are not connected to the world, you will be a lousy professor, a really lousy professor. You have to be intimately connected with, even embedded in the world, especially as a sociologist, or really, I guess, any kind of social scientist. But as a sociologist, if I am not aware of the world around me, I can't do anything. And so I looked at the world throughout my career, and I saw not only myself as an autistic suffering, which I did, and I still do sometimes, but I saw people throughout the world, especially in the third world, suffering much more than I could ever imagine. I have seen directly the suffering that people in the third world experience. The difference was I always had an exit, meaning I was just there as a visitor. I knew that I would be gone from there, whether in weeks or the same day. I did not have to stay there. I could see it, and it gave me a lot of anxiety, a lot of undirected anxiety, just seeing the kinds of troubles that people had. The reason I say undirected anxiety is because there was nothing I could do. I mean, how in the world can I fix the problems that exist in the third world? I couldn't. I'm just me. I'm just me. I'm just a simple autistic man who was lucky enough to get a Ph.D., become a professor, and become wealthy. And literally, it is nothing more than luck. Literally. Literally. It did involve some struggle, but I know a lot of autistics who have struggled immensely throughout their lives, and their lives were still failures. They never accomplished anything. They lived their lives in destitute poverty, really, really bad poverty. More autistics than not are poor. More autistics than not don't drive cars because they can't focus enough. More autistics than not don't work and live on public assistance. My child psychiatrist predicted I would live on public assistance. He was wrong, fortunately. I didn't find out he made that prediction from my parents, who told me, until after I was already successful, which I think was nice. They didn't tell me when I was a little kid. They told me later on, and they said it to me as a compliment, which is good, because my family was not known for compliments by any stretch of the imagination. So seeing that kind of suffering, seeing that kind of anxiety, whether through my activity in the civil rights movement, which in retrospect was not successful, the things we worked on were failures, including our work with Cesar Chavez and the migrant workers. The migrant workers now are worse off than they were when I was an activist at 12 and 13 years old. They're worse off. Worse off. That's always in my mind. That's always in my mind. Yet I was a part of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement as a whole failed. So that's my anxiety. A long way around to get to it, but that's my anxiety. Now, my righteous indignation, which is not anxiety. It's focused. It's focused on something concrete. In my case, it's focused on conscientization, making these podcasts. It's also focused on my work in Antifa, which for me involves helping people as best I can who live in the third world, which is only 2 miles away from me in Mexico, as best I can to deal with the oppression of my own country. When I go down there, I am acutely aware that my country is one of the major reasons why they are living in such a horrible condition. Can I do anything about it? A bit. And a bit of that bit is the conscientization of making these podcasts, but also going down there and offering support to people as much as I can, which is limited. There really isn't that much that we in the first world at this time can do for the third world. The first world is literally disintegrating before our eyes. We have so many problems here, and the problems are so obvious, and yet many people choose to close their eyes. And I don't know why. I don't know why. I literally don't know why. But many people have decided that they're simply going to ignore it, even though they're only living, in my case, 2 miles away from it, from the cartels. Now, are the cartels here in Hidalgo County, the warmest county in Texas as well? Yes. Many cartel members own these large mansions right here, right near where I live, maybe a few blocks. Why are they allowed to stay here? What do? Do you walk up to them and ask them for their ID? They're here. It's difficult. It's a difficult situation. These cartel members treat Mexicans horribly. Horribly. They treat Mexican Americans pretty horribly too. They themselves are Mexicans. And Border Patrol, which I don't like, to be honest, for a whole variety of reasons. What do? Well, a lot of what they do is get paid off by the cartels. Every month, there is a listing of cartel members who have been arrested for their involvement with cartel activity. Same thing is true with local police and state police and all that, the sheriff's department. It's a regional problem in this area. And I don't know what I can do. There's really nothing I can do to fix it. I'm aware of it. I know what the cartel members look like. I know how they dress because somebody explained it to me. And so I can, when I see a cartel member, I can say to myself, and just to myself, there's a cartel member. Do they cause any problems here in the US? Absolutely not. There are no problems here. There are no significant crime problems here. Hidalgo County, where I live, has one of the lowest crime rates in the entire state of Texas. Don't believe what your local newspapers say. It's not true. Now, there are problems, obviously, with people trying to cross the border, but that has nothing to do with this area, with the American side. This is a very safe area, extremely safe. And I feel guilty for that sometimes. The fact that I am living in a safe area, and yet I know that just to the south of me, cartel members are knocking on people's doors and saying, be out of your home in 20 minutes, or we will kill you. That's what they do. They blow up cars. They take people as hostages. If the ransom is not paid, they will decapitate the person slowly. So what can be said? There is plenty of room for righteous indignation. And that's what I try to devote myself to. Because if I focus on my own anxieties, especially as an autistic, that's not going to get me anywhere. I need to focus on the third world. And now, what I can do, however limited, and it is limited, I didn't realize how limited it would be before I moved down here. I really thought I could do a lot more than I can. And I'm not trying to discourage any of you from moving here, but if you do move to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, be aware that this is a very, very corrupt area. All industries, medical, automotive, anything you imagine. This is a very, very corrupt area. So be prepared for the corruption. Police are corrupt. Corruption is massive in this area. It seems as though everyone is looking to make a buck, and they don't seem to care about who they hurt in the process. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.